As we drift into the quiet hours of the evening, let us turn our thoughts away from the hurried pace of the modern world and instead allow our minds to settle on the steady rhythm of the past. History, when told softly and carefully, becomes more than a recounting of events. It becomes a gentle journey, a meditation through time, where the landscapes of long-vanished civilizations and the lives of extraordinary figures can accompany us into restful slumber. Tonight, our guide is one of history's most renowned and enigmatic figures, Genghis Khan, the great founder of the Mongol Empire. His life story, along with the rise of the empire he shaped, stretches across continents, reshaped the balance of power in the medieval world, and left legacies that echo even into the present. In this story, however, we will not dwell on drama or conquest as excitement. Instead, we will let the tale unfold slowly, as one might walk a long and winding path through a tranquil landscape. The story of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire is vast. Its roots lie deep in the nomadic traditions of the Central Asian steppe, while its branches extend across Eurasia, touching China, Persia, Russia, and even Europe. What we seek here is not the thrill of battle, but the calm unfolding of historical transformation. Let us begin by picturing the Mongolian steppe. Wide plains roll endlessly, covered in grass that bends with the wind. Horses, hardy and small, graze freely across these lands. For centuries, nomadic tribes roamed this terrain, moving with the seasons, living in felt tents called gurs, structures that could be easily dismantled and carried to the next pasture. Their lives were closely tied to their animals: horses for riding, sheep and goats for food, and camels for transport. To live on the steppe was to live in harmony with a challenging but beautiful environment. It was this world that shaped Temujin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan. The name Genghis Khan itself carries weight. Khan is a title used among Turkic and Mongolic peoples, signifying a leader or ruler. Genghis, often rendered as Chinggis in more accurate Mongolian transliteration, conveys a sense of universal or oceanic authority, sometimes translated as universal ruler or oceanic ruler. When Temujin united the Mongol tribes under his command in the early 13th century, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a leader whose authority was meant to extend beyond clan or tribe, reaching instead for the entirety of the known world. Yet before that unification, his early life was marked by hardship. Temujin was born around the year 1162 into a world of shifting alliances and constant rivalries. The Mongolian steppe was not a quiet land, but one in which tribes competed fiercely for resources, grazing lands, and prestige. Leaders rose and fell quickly, and survival depended on both strength and the ability to gather loyal followers. Temujin's family faced betrayal and abandonment after his father was poisoned by rivals. The boy and his kin were left vulnerable, without allies, and often without food. Out of such adversity, resilience was born. And in Temujin's case, resilience grew into ambition. To understand Genghis Khan's rise, we must also recognize the broader historical context. The 12th and 13th centuries were a time of great transition in Eurasia. In China, the once powerful Tang dynasty had fallen, and various kingdoms and dynasties competed for dominance. In the Islamic world, great centers of learning and trade thrived, but political unity was often elusive. In Europe, feudal kingdoms vied with one another, and crusades were launched toward the Holy Land. Across this vast landscape, the Mongol tribes might have seemed marginal, remote nomads on the edge of more established civilizations. Yet, from this apparent periphery, a force arose that would connect east and west in ways never before seen. The empire that Genghis Khan founded became the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Stretching from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the plains of Hungary in the west, from the steppes of Siberia in the north to the deserts of Persia in the south, the Mongol Empire encompassed an enormous diversity of peoples, languages, and traditions. The empire did not last in its original form for long, splintering into separate khanates within a century of Genghis's death, but the connections it fostered reshaped trade, cultural exchange, and political order. What makes this story so rich for us is not simply its scale, but the way it allows us to reflect on resilience, leadership, and the surprising ways human societies are linked across vast distances. The Mongols carried not only the thunder of their armies, but also the quiet threads of commerce along what would later be known as the Silk Road. Ideas, technologies, and goods traveled under the stability they imposed, sometimes harshly, but often effectively. In the quiet hours of reflection, we may see the paradox. From an empire forged through violence and conquest came periods of relative peace and exchange, remembered by historians as the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. As we prepare to journey through the life of Genghis Khan and the story of the empire he shaped, let us do so slowly, like a traveler unrolling a map by lamplight. The details are many, the landscapes are varied, and the figures we encounter are larger than life. But in recounting them here, softly and with care, they become companions for the night. By the time we reach the end, perhaps we will have not only learned about a remarkable era, but also found moments of stillness along the way. As we begin our journey through the story of Genghis Khan, it is important to first settle our minds upon the world that shaped him. To understand the man, we must first understand the land. And to understand the land, we must see the people who called it home. The steppe, stretching across Eurasia like a vast green sea, was the cradle of the Mongol way of life. This landscape, with its rolling plains and distant horizons, was neither harsh desert nor fertile farmland, but something in between, a challenging, beautiful, and demanding environment. Here, survival required mobility, resilience, and a close bond with the animals that sustained human life. In this setting, Mongol tribes thrived for centuries as pastoral nomads. They moved with the seasons, guiding their herds to fresh pastures. Sheep provided wool and food, goats offered milk. Horses, always central, gave both transport and status. The Mongols' portable homes, known as gurs, round felt tents supported by wooden lattices, were ingeniously suited for life on the move. At dawn, families would pack their belongings, dismantle their tents, and mount their animals, traversing great distances with ease. This mobility gave them not only survival, but also the ability to raid, trade, and interact with neighboring peoples. The social world of the steppe was one of clans and tribes, each bound by kinship ties and loyalty to a chief or khan. These units could be both fragile and resilient. A khan's authority was strong only as long as his charisma and ability to distribute wealth endured. If he failed, followers drifted away, forming new alliances. Rivalries were constant, and shifting loyalties defined the political map of Mongolia long before Temujin was born. To grow up here was to grow up in a world where trust was fragile, and one's life often depended on the strength of family bonds and the loyalty of allies. The Mongols were not alone on the steppe. Their neighbors included Turkic peoples, Tanguts, and other nomadic groups with whom they traded, fought, and intermarried. To the south lay the wealthy kingdoms of northern China, while far to the west stretched the lands of Central Asia, dotted with oasis towns along the Silk Road. These neighboring civilizations looked upon the nomads with suspicion, sometimes disdain, seeing them as uncivilized. Yet from the steppe came horses, wool, and hardy warriors, commodities and skills in high demand. Steppe peoples, though less urban, were far from isolated. Their lives intersected constantly with the wider world. Daily life on the steppe revolved around family and the cycles of nature. Women played vital roles, not only in tending livestock and raising children, but also in decision-making within the family unit. In times of war, women sometimes managed households alone, keeping the economy of the nomadic camp running smoothly. Men often focused on herding, hunting, and defense, but the line between roles was flexible. Both genders knew how to ride, and children learned to sit astride a horse almost as soon as they could walk. Horsemanship was not simply a skill, but a necessity, ingrained into the very fabric of existence. The spiritual life of these tribes also reflected the rhythms of nature. Mongols practiced a form of shamanism, revering the sky, the earth, and the spirits of their ancestors. The eternal blue sky was a sacred concept, embodying divine power and natural order. Shamans acted as intermediaries, conducting rituals to ensure harmony between the human world and the spirits. This worldview encouraged respect for the land and animals, but it also fostered a sense of destiny. Leaders could claim divine favor through their successes. In later years, Genghis Khan would use this belief to reinforce his authority, portraying his conquests as aligned with the will of the eternal blue sky. The political landscape of Mongolia in the 12th century was fragmented. No single tribe held lasting dominance. The Karait, Tatars, Naiman, and Merkits all vied for influence, forming alliances and waging wars against one another. These rivalries often turned violent, with raids that destroyed entire camps or scattered families. To live in such times was to live with uncertainty, but also with opportunity. A skilled leader could rise quickly, uniting tribes under his banner. Yet, just as swiftly, he could fall, undone by betrayal or defeat. Into this setting, Temujin was born. He entered a world where loyalty was fluid, violence frequent, and survival precarious. Yet it was also a world that offered extraordinary opportunities to those with courage, vision, and determination. The young boy's future was not guaranteed, but the environment itself, demanding, stark, and yet full of possibility, provided him with the tools he would need. The horse, the bow, the clan, and the sky. These were the pillars of steppe life, and from them would arise the foundation of the Mongol Empire. As we pause at the close of this first section, imagine the stillness of a Mongolian night. The wind sweeps across the grasslands, carrying with it the scent of earth and smoke from campfires. Stars stretch endlessly above, and the silhouettes of tents dot the horizon. Somewhere, a boy named Temujin sleeps beneath this sky, unaware that history will one day remember him as Genghis Khan. For now, he is only part of the steppe, one child among many, yet destined to change the shape of the world. As the winds of the steppe swept over the rolling grasslands, shaping the lives of those who lived upon them, they also shaped the boy named Temujin. His earliest years were marked not by ease but by adversity, and in the harsh lessons of his childhood, we begin to see the resilience that would later define him as Genghis Khan. To fall asleep with this story is to trace how challenge and hardship become teachers, slowly, steadily molding a young boy into a leader of extraordinary vision. Temujin was born around the year 1162, the son of Yesugei, a chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and his wife Hoilun. Yesugei, though not among the most powerful Khans of the Mongolian tribes, commanded respect through his skill in battle and his ability to secure alliances. Hoilun herself was remarkable. She had once been taken from another tribe and forced into marriage with Yesugei, a common practice among the steppe peoples. Despite this beginning, she became a strong matriarch, fiercely protective of her children and determined to keep them alive in a world that often showed little mercy. When Temujin was still a boy, his father arranged his betrothal to a girl named Berte from a neighboring tribe called the Ongirat. Such arrangements were practical, securing bonds between families and tribes. After this negotiation, Yesugei set out to return home, but was waylaid by the Tatars, bitter rivals of the Borjigin. Offered poisoned food and drink, he succumbed to treachery. His death, sudden and violent, left Temujin's family vulnerable. Without a strong leader to protect them, the Borjigin clan abandoned Hoilun and her children. In the world of the steppe, loyalty was fleeting, and without resources, the family was left alone, struggling for survival. These years of abandonment were some of the harshest in Temujin's life. His family scavenged for roots, berries, and small animals. At times, they were near starvation. The once proud family of a chieftain had been reduced to living on the margins, sustained only by Hoilun's determination and the children's labor. Temujin, the eldest son, grew quickly aware of the weight of responsibility. He had to learn not only how to hunt and fish, but also how to defend his family from raids. Out of this struggle emerged a keen sense of resilience, a habit of endurance that never left him. Sibling rivalries complicated their survival. Temujin's half-brother Begter, older and domineering, often clashed with him. In one fateful incident, tensions escalated beyond repair. Seeing Begter as a threat to his family's fragile survival, Temujin killed him. A shocking act, but one that reveals the unforgiving conditions of life on the steppe. Authority and responsibility were matters of life and death. This act left a permanent mark on Temujin, reminding him that leadership carried a heavy price and that decisive action, however harsh, was sometimes necessary. Despite these hardships, Temujin began to develop a network of allies. Even as a boy, he displayed charisma and determination that drew others toward him. Among his early companions was Jamuka, a childhood friend who would later become both ally and rival. Together they learned the arts of horsemanship, hunting, and warfare, skills that were the birthright of steppe youth. Though life was hard, Temujin was never without ambition. His vision, even in his early years, stretched beyond survival. He sought not only to restore his family's place among the Mongol tribes, but to unite the fractured world around him. The lessons of betrayal also shaped his outlook. When his clan abandoned him, Temujin learned that loyalty could not be assumed. Later in life, he would structure his army and society not around traditional aristocratic privilege, but around loyalty earned and proven. He rewarded ability and faithfulness over birthright, an innovation that helped him break old tribal divisions and build a more cohesive power. The roots of this merit-based system lay in the bitter experiences of his childhood. During these years, Temujin and his family often wandered alone, yet they were never entirely cut off from the broader world of the steppe. Occasionally, they interacted with neighboring tribes, sometimes securing aid, other times facing hostility. In this shifting environment, Temujin honed his ability to read people, to judge intentions quickly, and to cultivate trust where possible. These instincts, born in childhood, would later serve him well as a commander and statesman. It is easy, in the grand sweep of history, to forget the intimate struggles that shape leaders. The image of Genghis Khan often conjures vast armies and sweeping conquests. Yet behind that figure stands a boy who knew hunger, loss, and betrayal. It was these experiences, rather than privilege or comfort, that taught him resilience. He learned that strength came not only from force, but also from adaptability, patience, and the ability to endure when others faltered. As the night deepens, let us picture once more the Mongolian steppe. A small family, alone in a sea of grass, huddles around a fire. The wind whistles outside their tent, and the stars shine above, indifferent and eternal. Within that circle of light, a boy grows, carrying the scars of hardship, but also the seeds of greatness. In his heart, the memory of betrayal and survival burns quietly, waiting for the moment when it will drive him to transform his world. As we move deeper into the story of Genghis Khan, the quiet fire of Temujin's ambition begins to glow brighter. His childhood hardships had prepared him for survival, but survival alone was never enough. The fragmented tribes of the Mongolian steppe had long lived in cycles of alliance and betrayal, raiding and retreating. For centuries, no single figure had managed to unite them under one enduring banner. Yet, as we trace Temujin's early adulthood, we see the careful, patient steps by which he began to do what many before him had attempted but failed to achieve: the unification of the Mongol tribes. Temujin's path to leadership began with loyalty, first to his family and then to a growing circle of companions. One of the most significant moments came when he secured the loyalty of a man named Bo-Orchu, who aided him in retrieving stolen horses. This act of loyalty, freely given, became the foundation of a lifelong bond. In the harsh world of the steppe, such companions were worth more than wealth. Gradually, Temujin surrounded himself with men like Bo-Orchu and Jelme, followers who were bound to him not by blood but by trust and shared hardship. This was unusual in Mongol society, where ties of kinship normally dictated allegiance. Temujin's marriage to Berte also strengthened his position. She was his childhood betrothed, and when he claimed her as wife, the alliance with her Angirat tribe gave him greater legitimacy. Berte herself would play a crucial role in his life, not merely as a wife, but as an advisor, a symbol of unity, and a source of personal motivation. Soon after their marriage, however, Berte was abducted by the Merkits, a rival tribe, in a raid. Temujin, with the support of his ally Togrul, Khan of the Karait, and his childhood friend Jamuka, led a campaign to rescue her. The successful recovery of Berte not only restored his household, but also cemented his reputation as a capable and determined leader. This moment set in motion a pattern. Temujin demonstrated loyalty to his allies, and in turn they lent him strength. With Togrul and Jamuka by his side, his influence grew. Yet alliances on the steppe were fragile. Before long, Jamuka and Temujin, once sworn brothers, diverged in their visions of leadership. Jamuka represented the traditional aristocracy of the steppe, favoring leadership based on noble birth. Temujin, shaped by his hardships, leaned toward merit. He elevated men of humble origins if they showed loyalty and ability. This difference would ultimately break their brotherhood. The split became formal in the late 1180s when Temujin gathered his followers and was declared Khan of the Mongols. The title was significant, though it did not yet mean he ruled over all Mongols. It signified, rather, a claim, a statement that his vision for unity was taking shape. Jamuka, unwilling to accept this challenge, also declared himself leader of a rival coalition. Conflict between them was inevitable. The first major clash between the two came in 1187. Temujin, though outnumbered, demonstrated his skill in strategy and discipline. His forces were organized in units of tens, hundreds, and thousands, creating order out of the chaos of battle. Despite his innovations, Jamuka's larger army eventually overwhelmed him, inflicting a devastating defeat. Yet even in loss, Temujin learned. He retreated, preserved his core of loyal followers, and refined his methods. Defeat for him was not an end, but a lesson in resilience and adaptation. Over time, Temujin rebuilt his power. He gained strength by continuing to emphasize loyalty over lineage, offering rewards to those who served faithfully and severely punishing betrayal. His code of justice, later formalized as the Yasa, reflected this approach. It demanded discipline, honesty, and order. Among nomads accustomed to the shifting sands of clan loyalty, Temujin's system offered a new kind of stability. Those who joined him knew they would be treated fairly, regardless of their origins. In this way, he slowly attracted not only warriors, but also entire families and clans seeking order and protection. Religion, too, played a subtle role in his unification. Temujin did not impose a single faith, but allowed freedom of worship, respecting shamanic traditions, while also showing tolerance for Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims. This inclusiveness widened his appeal, creating a coalition that extended beyond traditional tribal divisions. It also revealed his pragmatic vision. He understood that unity required accommodation as well as strength. By the early 1200s, Temujin's influence was undeniable. His rivals diminished, his allies multiplied, and in 1206, a great council known as the Kurultai was convened. At this gathering, the Mongol tribes, long divided, acknowledged Temujin as their supreme leader. It was here that he was given the title Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The proclamation was more than symbolic. It marked the beginning of a new era in steppe history. No longer would the Mongols be fragmented by endless rivalries. Under Genghis Khan, they became a single force, bound by discipline, loyalty, and vision. For the Mongols themselves, this unification meant a transformation of daily life. Camps were no longer vulnerable fragments, but part of a greater whole. Armies moved with precision, and trade between tribes became more stable. For neighboring states, the rise of Genghis Khan was a storm gathering on the horizon. They had long dealt with nomadic raiders, but now they faced something unprecedented. A unified steppe, led by a man of extraordinary will. As we drift gently toward the close of this section, imagine the plains of Mongolia once more. Instead of scattered camps, envision banners gathering, horses in neat formations, and families pledging loyalty to a leader who promised order in a world of chaos. Temujin. Now Genghis Khan stood at the center, gazing across the steppe. His hardships had prepared him, his vision had carried him, and now his people were united. The great conquest still lay ahead, but the first and most difficult victory, the uniting of the Mongols, was already his. With the Mongol tribes unified under his command, Genghis Khan now turned outward, testing the strength of his newly forged army and the resilience of the political order he had established. His first campaigns were not yet the sweeping conquests of legend, but essential steps that demonstrated his methods of war, his vision of governance, and the discipline that distinguished his forces from those of other steppe leaders. As we gently explore this period, we see how the early campaigns prepared the Mongols for the vast expansion that would follow, and how their approach to conflict blended ferocity with careful organization. The Mongols' earliest campaigns focused on securing the steppe itself. For centuries, rival tribes such as the Tatars, Naimans, Merkits, and others had resisted any attempt at unification. Although Genghis Khan had brought many under his authority, some remained hostile. These groups threatened the fragile unity he had achieved, and eliminating them became his first priority. The Tatars, in particular, had a long history of enmity with his family, having poisoned his father years earlier. For Genghis Khan, defeating them was not only a political necessity, but also a matter of personal justice. The Mongol army was distinctive in its structure. Divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, it combined flexibility with precision. Every man knew his place, and discipline was enforced rigorously. Unlike traditional tribal warfare, which often dissolved into chaos, Genghis Khan's forces operated with near-mechanical coordination. Each warrior was expected to be self-sufficient, carrying supplies and spare horses to allow rapid movement across long distances. Communication was also key. Messages were relayed with remarkable speed, using mounted couriers who ensured that commands traveled across vast expanses of battlefield or terrain. In these first campaigns, the Mongols revealed the tactics that would later make them feared across continents. Feigned retreats, in which warriors pretended to flee only to lure enemies into ambush, became a signature move. Precision archery, conducted from horseback at full speed, gave the Mongols overwhelming mobility. Their strategy relied on speed, deception, and discipline, rather than sheer numbers. In this way, smaller Mongol forces could outmaneuver larger, less coordinated opponents. One by one, rival tribes fell. The Tatars were crushed, their leaders executed, and survivors absorbed into the Mongol fold. This practice of absorption was crucial. Instead of merely destroying enemies, Genghis Khan integrated them into his army and society, giving them places in his military structure. Talent, not origin, determined advancement. By rewarding loyalty and skill, he steadily grew his ranks while breaking down old tribal divisions. Former enemies became part of a new Mongol identity. The Merkits, who had once abducted his wife Berte, were another target. Years after her rescue, Genghis Khan returned to exact lasting vengeance. With allies, he attacked their camps, dispersing them permanently. This victory not only avenged his personal wounds, but also secured the loyalty of those who saw him as a leader who never forgot betrayal, yet offered stability to those who submitted. The Naimans posed a more formidable challenge, as they were among the strongest tribes in the steppe. Their defeat required careful coordination, with Genghis Khan employing his full array of strategies. Ultimately, they too fell, further consolidating his power. By the time these campaigns concluded, the once fragmented steppe had become a single, disciplined domain. The Mongols were no longer a loose collection of tribes, but a unified people under one Khan. Beyond military conquest, these early campaigns also revealed Genghis Khan's talent for governance. After each victory, he established clear rules, distributing spoils in a fair manner, ensuring loyalty, and imposing his emerging code of law, the Yasa. The Yasa emphasized order, prohibiting theft, adultery, and betrayal, while also regulating hunting and military conduct. In a society accustomed to shifting loyalties, this system provided stability. The Mongols, long plagued by internal strife, now lived under a consistent framework of justice. Economically, the unification of the steppe through these campaigns created new opportunities. Trade routes, once vulnerable to raids, became safer under Mongol control. Merchants and artisans were protected as Genghis Khan recognized their value to his growing empire. While warfare was his path to power, order and commerce were his tools for sustaining it. Even in these first campaigns, we glimpse the dual nature of his leadership, fierce in war, but pragmatic in peace. The psychological impact of these campaigns was profound. Stories of Mongol victories spread rapidly, magnified by the fearsome reputation of their tactics. Enemies often surrendered rather than face battle, knowing the Mongols' ferocity and discipline. This reputation, carefully cultivated, would later allow the empire to expand with less resistance. Fear, as much as force, became a weapon in Genghis Khan's arsenal. As the Mongols secured their homeland, they also gained confidence. The early campaigns served as a proving ground, forging an army that trusted its leader and believed in its destiny. The steppe, once fractured by endless rivalries, had become the heart of a rising empire. From here, the Mongols would look outward, their eyes turning toward the wealthier lands of China and beyond. As we pause at the close of this section, let us imagine the steppe transformed. Where once rival camps had stood apart, now banners of unity flew. Horses grazed in great numbers, warriors trained in organized ranks, and families settled under the promise of stability. Genghis Khan, once a boy abandoned to hardship, now stood as the undisputed master of the steppe. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, and beyond that horizon lay the kingdoms of the world, waiting to be tested by the strength of his people. With the Mongolian steppe firmly under his authority, Genghis Khan turned his gaze southward toward the rich and fertile lands of northern China. There, the Jin Dynasty held sway, commanding vast cities, sophisticated bureaucracies, and armies far larger than those of the nomadic tribes. The Jin had long regarded the peoples of the steppe as troublesome raiders, sometimes appeasing them with gifts, sometimes attempting to suppress them through force. Yet now they faced something new. Not scattered tribes, but a unified Mongol nation, disciplined, mobile, and guided by the unyielding vision of Genghis Khan. The Jin Dynasty, founded by the Jurchen people, controlled northern China from the 12th century onward. They ruled over millions of farmers, artisans, and scholars, supported by wealthy cities and strong fortresses. In comparison, the Mongols seemed small, their population numbering only in the hundreds of thousands. Yet Genghis Khan saw opportunity where others saw imbalance. He understood that the discipline of his warriors, combined with the mobility of their horses and the precision of their strategies, could counter the larger but less flexible armies of the Jin. The campaign began in 1211. Genghis Khan gathered his forces and crossed the Great Wall, a structure meant to keep steppe raiders at bay. The Mongols, however, did not attack blindly. They exploited weaknesses in the wall's defenses, finding unguarded passes and using speed to outmaneuver garrisons. Once inside Jin territory, they unleashed their characteristic tactics: swift cavalry raids, feigned retreats, and encirclements that shattered enemy formations. One of the keys to Mongol success was their adaptability. Where steppe warriors were once thought incapable of taking fortified cities, the Mongols learned quickly. Capturing engineers and artisans from conquered peoples, they acquired siege technology, catapults, battering rams, and even early forms of gunpowder weapons. With these tools, they turned their attention not only to open battlefields, but also to walled cities that had previously seemed beyond their reach. The siege of Zhongdu, present-day Beijing, would prove a turning point. Zhongdu was a city of immense wealth and strong defenses. The Jin believed it impregnable. Yet the Mongols besieged it with patience, cutting off supplies and employing siege machines constructed by captured engineers from northern China and Central Asia. Famine set in, weakening the defenders. By 1215, the city fell to Mongol hands, marking one of the greatest victories of Genghis Khan's career. The fall of Zhongdu demonstrated to the world that the Mongols were no longer mere raiders. They were conquerors capable of dismantling established states. The conquest of the Jin dynasty was not immediate or total. Over the next years, campaigns continued, with Mongol forces pressing deeper into Jin territory. Their approach combined destruction with pragmatism. While resisting cities faced devastation, those that surrendered were often spared and integrated into the Mongol system. Skilled artisans, scholars, and officials were valued, relocated to serve the empire, or allowed to continue their work under Mongol oversight. Genghis Khan's vision extended beyond victory in battle. He sought to harness the wealth and knowledge of the conquered. The impact of these campaigns rippled across Asia. For the Mongols, they brought access to new resources, grain, silk, and technology that enriched their society. For the Jin dynasty, the pressure was immense, forcing them to retreat southward, gradually losing ground to the encroaching Mongols. For neighboring states, the message was clear. A new power was rising, one that combined the ferocity of the steppe with the sophistication of siegecraft and administration. Daily life in conquered territories also changed. Mongol administrators ensured order through the Yasa Code, imposing clear rules that applied across diverse populations. Trade routes were secured, allowing merchants greater safety than before. Although the violence of conquest was undeniable, the aftermath often brought a strange kind of stability. Farmers returned to their fields, artisans to their workshops, and caravans to the roads, all under the shadow of Mongol authority. The psychological effect of Mongol campaigns was as important as the physical. News of Zhongdu's fall spread far and wide, sowing fear in other cities and courts. Some chose to surrender preemptively, hoping to avoid destruction. Genghis Khan skillfully used this reputation, understanding that fear itself could achieve what armies sometimes could not. By fostering both awe and terror, he extended his reach with fewer battles than might otherwise have been required. As the campaign unfolded, Genghis Khan's empire began to shift from a purely nomadic base toward a more complex, multi-ethnic entity. The inclusion of Chinese administrators and artisans enriched Mongol society, while the resources of northern China provided the foundation for future campaigns farther west. The conquest of the Jin Dynasty was not simply a military achievement, but a transformative moment in the making of the Mongol Empire. It demonstrated that Genghis Khan's ambition was not limited to the steppe, but extended to the great civilizations that lay beyond. As we close this section, picture the quiet aftermath of conquest. A once mighty city lies subdued, its walls broken, yet life begins to stir again. Markets reopen under the watch of Mongol soldiers, farmers return to the land, and the hum of daily life resumes, though now under a new order. Above it all, Genghis Khan looks onward, not content with one victory, but already envisioning the next horizon. The Jin Dynasty, though not entirely destroyed, had been broken, and the path westward was now open. After the great victories against the Jin Dynasty, Genghis Khan's eyes turned westward. Beyond the steppes of Central Asia lay the Khwarazmian Empire, a vast and wealthy state stretching across Persia, Transoxiana, and parts of modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The Khwarazmian Empire was not only strategically positioned, but also rich in commerce, sitting astride the Silk Road, where merchants carried silk, spices, gems, and ideas between China and the Mediterranean. It seemed natural that the Mongols, now a rising power, would seek peaceful trade relations with such a neighbor. Yet what began as a diplomatic mission soon ignited one of the most brutal campaigns in Genghis Khan's career. The Khwarazmian Empire in the early 13th century was ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II. His realm was formidable. Great cities such as Bukhara and Samarkand thrived as centers of learning and trade, their mosques and markets bustling with activity. The Shah commanded large armies and believed himself secure behind the deserts and mountains that separated him from the Mongols. From his perspective, the nomads of the steppe, though dangerous, were too distant to pose a serious threat. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan of merchants to the Khwarazmian city of Otrar, bearing goods and seeking to establish formal trade. This was not a raid, but an act of diplomacy, meant to create channels of commerce between east and west. Yet suspicion and arrogance intervened. The governor of Otrar, distrustful of the Mongols and perhaps envious of their wealth, accused the caravan of espionage. Acting without restraint, he seized the goods and executed the merchants. Genghis Khan, upon hearing of this atrocity, chose restraint first. He dispatched envoys to the Shah, demanding punishment of the governor and restitution for the crime. The Shah, however, compounded the insult. He not only refused the demand, but executed one of the ambassadors and mutilated the others before sending them back. In the culture of the steppe, the killing of envoys was considered one of the gravest offenses, an act that shattered all possibility of trust. For Genghis Khan, it was not merely an insult, but an unforgivable provocation. Diplomacy had been answered with violence. Retribution would follow. In 1219, the Mongol army rode westward in force. Though smaller in number than the Shah's armies, they carried with them unmatched discipline, mobility, and strategic ingenuity. The campaign that followed was both swift and devastating, remembered as one of the most ruthless in history. The Mongols crossed the deserts of Central Asia with astonishing speed, moving where the Shah believed no army could. They attacked suddenly, appearing like a storm over the horizon. The first major city to fall was Bukhara. When the Mongols entered, they addressed the population with words that revealed both the inevitability of conquest and the pragmatism of Mongol rule. "I am the punishment of heaven," Genghis Khan is said to have declared. "If you had not committed great sins, heaven would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Yet after conquest, he often spared artisans, scholars, and those useful to his empire, relocating them to serve elsewhere. What was destroyed were the city's defenses and its will to resist. Samarkand, another jewel of the Silk Road, soon followed. Despite its formidable walls and large garrison, it fell quickly, overwhelmed by Mongol siegecraft and cunning. Once again, survivors were absorbed, with skilled craftsmen and administrators relocated, while resistance was crushed. City after city fell, each one sending shockwaves across the Islamic world. The Shah's forces, though numerous, were disorganized and unable to match Mongol speed. Genghis Khan divided his armies into multiple columns, striking simultaneously across wide fronts, confusing and overwhelming the defenders. The Shah himself fled, retreating across Persia and eventually dying in obscurity on an island in the Caspian Sea. His empire, once proud and confident, was shattered in a matter of years. The Mongols, having begun with a desire for trade, now stood astride the ruins of Khwarazmian power. The brutality of the campaign became legendary, as entire populations were destroyed when they resisted. Yet alongside destruction came new connections. The Mongols now controlled critical stretches of the Silk Road, linking China with the Middle East more directly than ever before. The aftermath of the Khwarazmian Campaign revealed both the ruthless and pragmatic sides of Mongol rule. Cities that resisted were obliterated, serving as warnings to others. Yet those that surrendered quickly were often spared and integrated. Scholars, engineers, and artisans were transported eastward to enrich the Mongol state, while trade routes were stabilized under Mongol authority. The harsh lesson was clear: submission brought survival and even prosperity; defiance brought ruin. For the wider world, the campaign demonstrated the unprecedented reach of Genghis Khan's empire. From the plains of Mongolia to the cities of Persia, no distance seemed too great for the Mongol cavalry. The campaign also marked the first time that the Islamic world directly felt the force of Mongol power. It was a shock that would reverberate for decades, reshaping political landscapes across the Middle East. As we pause, imagine the contrast between the once bustling bazaars of Bukhara and Samarkand and the silence that followed conquest. Dust rises in the streets where merchants once traded goods from India, China, and Byzantium. Yet along those same roads, under new masters, caravans will soon travel again, carrying the flow of commerce east and west. From diplomacy betrayed came destruction, and from destruction emerged a new order, with Genghis Khan's empire stretching farther than ever before. By the early 1220s, the Mongol Empire had already stretched from the shores of the Pacific to the heart of Persia. Yet Genghis Khan's ambitions, and the ambitions of his generals, carried them farther still. Beyond the Khwarazmian lands, across the steppes of Central Asia, lay Russia, the Caucasus, and the fringes of Europe. It was here that the Mongols would test their power against unfamiliar kingdoms, laying the foundations for a presence that would shape the destinies of Eastern Europe and beyond. The first Mongol contacts with Europe came almost by accident, born from pursuit rather than deliberate expansion. After the fall of the Khwarazmian Empire, several remnants of the Shah's army fled westward into the Caucasus, pursued by Mongol forces. Genghis Khan sent a contingent led by his generals Subotai and Jibei, two of his most brilliant commanders, to continue the chase. What began as pursuit soon became exploration, as these generals pushed beyond the Caspian Sea into lands little known to the Mongols. In the Caucasus, they encountered a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities, including the Georgians and the Alans. These peoples, accustomed to mountain warfare and fortified towns, initially resisted. Yet the Mongols, true to their methods, combined speed with cunning. They exploited divisions among their enemies, forming temporary alliances to defeat one foe before turning on another. In time, the Caucasus was subdued, and Mongol scouts pressed further north, entering the vast forests and plains of the Kievan Russes. The Rus principalities, such as Kiev, Novgorod, and Vladimir, were fragmented, each ruled by its own prince. They were linked by common culture and Orthodox Christianity, but divided by rivalry. When the Mongols arrived, these divisions left them vulnerable. In 1223, the Rus princes, alarmed by the Mongol presence, formed a coalition and marched to confront them on the Kalka River. It was one of the earliest direct clashes between Mongol and European forces. The battle revealed the vast difference in military organization. The Rus, heavily armored and less mobile, relied on traditional infantry and cavalry formations. The Mongols, by contrast, deployed their trademark feigned retreats. They lured the Rus into pursuit, stretched their lines, and then turned to encircle them. The result was devastating. The Rus' coalition was annihilated, with thousands slain. For the Mongols, the victory confirmed the superiority of their methods. For the Rus, it was a shocking encounter with a new and terrifying enemy. Yet the Mongols did not stay. Having achieved their objectives and tested the western frontier, Subotai and Jibei withdrew eastward, their reconnaissance complete. The princes of the Rus may have breathed a sigh of relief, but the memory of the Mongols lingered like a shadow, a warning of storms yet to come. In later decades, Mongol armies would return in greater force, ultimately bringing the Russes under their rule. For now, however, the campaign was a glimpse of the future, an opening act on the edge of Europe. The Mongols' push westward did not stop with the Russes. Their scouts and raids extended into Hungary and Poland in the years that followed, probing the defenses of Christendom. European chroniclers began to record tales of a mysterious people from the east, fierce horsemen who seemed to appear suddenly, strike with terrible speed, and vanish again. Some believed they were the punishment of God, sent to chastise sinful nations. Others speculated wildly about their origins, linking them to biblical tribes or mythical figures. Fear mingled with fascination, as news of the Mongols spread along the trade routes into Europe. For the Mongols, these campaigns were not only military exercises, but also lessons in geography and diplomacy. They learned of distant kingdoms, of rivers and mountains, of the wealth of lands far beyond their traditional horizons. The world was opening before them, and their empire was becoming not just a regional power, but a force spanning continents. From a broader perspective, the Mongols' first forays into Europe revealed their unique approach to empire building. They did not conquer blindly, nor did they seek to hold every territory they touched. Instead, they advanced in stages, testing resistance, gathering intelligence, and striking only when conditions favored success. This patience, combined with relentless discipline, allowed them to expand steadily without overextending their resources. The impact on Europe was profound, even in these early encounters. The fear of the Mongols lingered in the imagination of kings and commoners alike. Diplomats began to consider new alliances, and the papacy itself sent envoys eastward to learn more about the mysterious empire. Though Genghis Khan himself would never set foot in Europe, his influence reached its borders, unsettling its politics and reshaping its sense of the wider world. As we close this section, let us imagine the edge of the known world as seen through Mongol eyes. The great forests of Russia stretch endlessly, rivers glint in the sunlight, and beyond lies a continent unfamiliar yet beckoning. To the east, the steppes remain their heartland. To the west, new horizons call. For Genghis Khan and his generals, the empire has no fixed boundary, only the ever-expanding circle of the eternal blue sky. Thus far, our journey has followed Genghis Khan and his armies across the steppes, into China, Persia, and the edges of Europe. Yet to understand the Mongol Empire fully, we must pause and look inward, not at battles, but at the texture of life within this vast and unprecedented realm. For beyond conquest lay administration, daily life, and the quiet rhythms that sustained millions under Mongol rule. The empire was not only a military phenomenon, it was also a structure of governance, culture, and commerce that bound together an extraordinary diversity of peoples. One of Genghis Khan's most remarkable achievements was the creation of a legal and administrative system that could hold together such a vast and varied territory. At the heart of this system was the yasa, a body of law attributed to the Khan himself. Though never written in a single codex, the yasa established principles of order, prohibitions against theft, adultery, and betrayal, rules governing military discipline, and guidelines for the treatment of ambassadors, merchants, and commoners. Under this law, individuals were judged not by their tribe of origin, but by their conduct. This principle, radical in its time, helped knit together populations that had once been divided by custom and lineage. Trade flourished under Mongol rule. With the steppe unified and major cities subdued, the great arteries of the Silk Road came under Mongol protection. Caravans could travel from China to Persia with unprecedented safety, guarded by patrols and supported by a system of way stations. These stations, known as the yam, were spread at regular intervals, providing fresh horses, food, and shelter for travelers. Messengers could cover astonishing distances in a matter of days, carrying news and orders across the empire. Merchants, in turn, benefited from this infrastructure, moving goods more freely than ever before. The result was an age of exchange historians sometimes call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Spices from India, silk from China, glass from the Middle East, and silver from Europe all circulated along these routes. Ideas traveled with them. Knowledge of astronomy, medicine, and engineering crossed borders, enriching societies far removed from their origins. Even diseases, most famously the plague that swept across Eurasia in the 14th century, followed these routes, a reminder that interconnectedness brought both prosperity and peril. Life in Mongol lands varied depending on region. In Mongolia itself, nomadic traditions remained strong. Families continued to live in gurs, tending herds and moving with the seasons. Yet in conquered territories like northern China or Persia, urban life continued under Mongol oversight. Cities rebuilt after conquest thrived as centers of administration and trade. Artisans worked in workshops, scholars debated in madrasas, and farmers tilled fields much as they always had, though now under the banner of Mongol authority. Religion under the Mongols was characterized by tolerance. Genghis Khan himself adhered to the shamanic traditions of the steppe, revering the eternal blue sky. Yet he recognized the value of permitting diverse beliefs among his subjects. Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, and others all found space within the empire. Religious leaders were often exempted from taxation, a policy that encouraged cooperation. This tolerance was both pragmatic and profound. By respecting local faiths, the Mongols reduced resistance and fostered stability. In cities such as Karakoram, the empire's capital, one could find temples, mosques, and churches standing near one another, a rare sight in the medieval world. Socially, the empire offered unusual opportunities. Because Genghis Khan valued loyalty and talent over noble birth, individuals of humble origin could rise to positions of great authority. A shepherd might become a general. A foreign artisan might serve in the royal court. This meritocratic approach broke old hierarchies and rewarded ability, creating a sense of possibility that was both empowering and destabilizing. At the same time, the harsh discipline of Mongol rule left little room for disobedience. Justice was swift and punishment severe, ensuring that order was maintained. Economically, the Mongols encouraged not only long-distance trade, but also local productivity. They supported irrigation projects in Central Asia, rebuilt infrastructure in northern China, and facilitated the movement of skilled workers across their domains. Sometimes this meant forced relocation, as artisans or administrators were moved far from home to serve in new regions. Yet these transfers also spread knowledge, creating cross-pollination of skills and ideas that enriched the empire as a whole. For ordinary people, life under Mongol rule was a balance of fear and stability. The memory of conquest lingered, a reminder of the consequences of resistance. Yet once incorporated, communities often experienced greater security than before, especially along trade routes. Farmers could till their land without constant fear of raiders, merchants could journey with relative safety, and craftsmen found new patrons in Mongol rulers. The empire's harsh beginnings gave way, in many places, to a kind of guarded peace. Culturally, the Mongols themselves began to change. Contact with sedentary civilizations influenced their tastes, from clothing and architecture to administration and art. In Karakoram, artisans from across the empire built palaces, markets, and monuments that reflected a blending of styles. Persian administrators, Chinese engineers, and Arab scholars all found places in the Mongol court. This cosmopolitanism, though centered on the demands of the conquerors, enriched the empire and left legacies that outlasted its political unity. As we reflect on life under the Mongols, we see a paradox. An empire forged through violence became, in many regions, a guarantor of peace. A society rooted in nomadic traditions governed some of the world's greatest cities. A ruler who rose from hardship created a system that allowed people of many backgrounds to thrive together. This complexity is what makes the Mongol Empire so fascinating, not merely a story of conquest, but of transformation and connection. As night deepens, picture the empire not as a battlefield, but as a vast web of roads, markets, and settlements. A caravan makes its way across the desert, guided by the stars and supported by Mongol way stations. In a distant city, merchants bargain under the watchful gaze of Mongol soldiers. In the steppe, families sit in their gurs, warmed by fire, under the endless canopy of the eternal blue sky. The empire breathes quietly, vast yet interconnected, a world at once fractured and whole. As our long journey draws toward its close, it is time to reflect on what Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire left behind. The story of conquest and empire has carried us from the windswept steppes of Mongolia to the bustling cities of China, the deserts of Persia, and the forests at the edge of Europe. Yet history does not end with battles. What endures is legacy, the imprint of an era upon the centuries that follow. In the case of Genghis Khan, that legacy is vast, complex, and still felt today. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the empire he had forged stretched farther than any single polity before him. Yet his death did not end Mongol expansion. His descendants, sons, grandsons, and generals, carried the empire outward in all directions. Under Ogedei, his third son and chosen successor, the Mongols pushed deeper into China, ultimately capturing the Song dynasty's southern territories and completing the conquest of the country. Under Batu, his grandson, they invaded Eastern Europe, overrunning Russia, Hungary, and Poland. Under Hulagu, another grandson, they marched into the Middle East, toppling the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Under Kublai, perhaps the most famous of his descendants, they established the Yuan dynasty in China, ruling as emperors from Beijing. The fragmentation of the empire into separate khanates, the Yuan in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, might seem like decline. Yet for centuries, these states carried forward the structures Genghis Khan created. Trade flourished across their borders, cities prospered under their protection, and ideas continued to travel along the great routes they safeguarded. The political unity of the empire may have splintered, but its cultural and economic networks endured. One of the most enduring legacies of Genghis Khan was the transformation of global trade. The Pax Mongolica stabilized the Silk Road, creating conditions for unprecedented movement of goods and ideas. Chinese technologies such as printing, papermaking, and gunpowder traveled westward. Persian and Arab knowledge in astronomy, medicine, and mathematics traveled east. Europe, still in its medieval phase, absorbed these influences, setting the stage for later developments in the Renaissance and beyond. In this sense, Genghis Khan can be seen not only as a conqueror, but also as an unwitting facilitator of global exchange. His impact on governance was equally significant. By promoting individuals based on merit rather than noble birth, he challenged deeply rooted aristocratic traditions. The legal and administrative structures he devised offered a model of order that inspired later states. His code of law, the Yasa, though often harsh, established principles of discipline and accountability that shaped governance across the khanates. In the Islamic world, Mongol rulers like Hulagu adopted aspects of Persian administration, blending Mongol and local practices. In China, Kublai Khan built upon both Mongol and Chinese systems, creating a hybrid form of government that influenced later dynasties. Culturally, the Mongols became both transmitters and absorbers. They carried artisans and scholars across their empire, sometimes by force, sometimes by invitation, creating an exchange of ideas unmatched in scale. Architecture, literature, and art all bore traces of this cosmopolitanism. In Persia, Mongol rulers patronized Islamic art and scholarship. In China, the Yuan dynasty encouraged theater and drama while also fostering Tibetan Buddhism. Even in Europe, the fearsome image of the Mongols coexisted with curiosity as travelers like Marco Polo journeyed east and returned with stories that expanded Western horizons. Yet the legacy of Genghis Khan is not without shadows. His campaigns caused immense destruction. Entire cities were razed, populations slaughtered, and cultural treasures lost. The memory of Mongol brutality lingered for centuries in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and China. Chronicles often depicted them as ruthless invaders, instruments of divine punishment or chaos. This darker aspect of the legacy cannot be ignored, for it reminds us that empire, however transformative, often comes at devastating human cost. Still, the Mongols' emphasis on order, stability, and openness to trade created conditions for recovery in many places. In Russia, Mongol rule, though heavy, shaped the development of centralized power that would later define Muscovy and the Russian state. In China, the Yuan dynasty introduced new systems of taxation and administration, some of which influenced later Ming reforms. In Central Asia, Mongol networks supported cities that flourished as hubs of Islamic learning and commerce. The memory of Genghis Khan himself has also shifted over time. In Mongolia, he is revered as a national hero, the founder of the nation and a symbol of unity. His name graces monuments, airports, and institutions. In other regions, he is remembered more cautiously as a conqueror who brought devastation. In the West, he has often been cast as a symbol of barbarism. though modern scholarship increasingly recognizes the complexity of his rule, noting both the destruction he wrought and the connections he fostered. At a deeper level, his legacy invites reflection on the nature of leadership and human ambition. Genghis Khan began as a boy abandoned on the steppe, surviving hunger, betrayal, and hardship. From these beginnings, he forged not only an empire, but a vision that transcended tribe and clan. His belief in loyalty over lineage, his pragmatic tolerance of religions, and his recognition of the value of trade and knowledge reveal a mind both ruthless and farsighted. He was not a figure of simple contrasts, but a leader whose life embodies the paradoxes of history. As we drift toward the end of our exploration, imagine the vast landscape of his empire once more. From the grasslands of Mongolia to the palaces of China, from the caravanserais of Persia to the forests of Russia, his influence stretches like the horizon itself. Some places remember fire and ruin, others remember prosperity and peace. Yet all, in some measure, felt the imprint of the man called Genghis Khan. In the quiet of night, let us hold this paradox gently. History rarely offers pure heroes or villains. Instead, it offers human beings, shaped by hardship, driven by vision, capable of both destruction and creation. Genghis Khan was such a figure, larger than life, yet rooted in the soil of the steppe, a man whose journey reshaped the world. His empire has long since faded, but the connections he forged, the lessons he embodied, and the questions he leaves us remain. As the eternal blue sky once looked down upon his life, so it looks down still, vast and unchanging. Beneath it, generations continue, their lives touched in ways both subtle and profound by the legacies of the past. And so with this reflection, we bring our journey to its gentle close, the story of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire now woven into the stillness of the night.